everyone. Welcome. If you were expecting to find Susan Stabile and reflecting on the woman caught in adultery, you can look forward to that happening next Sunday at this time. Susan's husband unexpectedly lost his younger brother to a massive heart attack, so she's traveling with Dave to the funeral this morning. And Father Griffith asked me on Wednesday if I would, is the term pinch hit or pitch hit? I never remember this. Pinch. So I am pinch hitting today. My name is Diane Millis. I'm a member of the parish. My husband Mark and I have been a part of the community now for about 2.5 years. And we're thrilled to be a part of the community. In addition to being a part of this community, I'm an educator and I teach in the area of Christian spirituality, do a lot of retreat work, and do spiritual direction. So today we're going to work with this gospel in a way that I invite people to do so in a retreat setting. So it may be a little bit different than what you've done with Father Griffith in the past, but he seemed to be kind of excited about the prospect that we'd engage you in additional ways. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. And as Deb mentioned, some of us are still waking up, and we'll just wake up together, right? The spiritual life is about awakening, so let's practice that together. All right, on your tables, you have a copy of the text. So what I'd like to do, I'm assuming, and I'm very comfortable in making this assumption, that each of you has read this text at least once in your life. Am I careful in making that? Can I be confident about that, or should I be cautious? Okay, I'm going to be confident. Now here's my hope. You know, as a teacher, you always talk about your hoped for outcomes. Here's my hope for each of us, that we will have a new way of being in relationship to this gospel, to this parable, which you just claimed you have familiarity with. So my hope is that you'll have a new discovery or sense of connection to this parable. So I'm going to come back about an hour from now, and I'm going to check in, and I'm going to say, what did you discover? What did you find? In today's reading, for those of you that were at the first Mass or last night, from Isaiah, behold, I'm doing something new. So I'm trusting that the Lord is going to be conveying something new to each of us. The other assumption I make is what's conveyed to you or to you or to you. It's not necessarily going to be the same message. So I think it will be particular to what it is the Holy Spirit has for us this morning. All right? So it's with that sense of anticipation that I invite us, if we could just quiet our hearts. And I will read from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, he found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous?" Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last. The last will be first, and the first will be last. And if we looked at where this particular parable is placed in the Gospel of Matthew, we will see that in the preceding chapter, it also says this reference to the last will be first and the first will be last. So this is an echo. This is an echo going throughout the Gospel of Matthew. It's also an echo going through other Gospels. We're going to look at this sense of the implication of this economy which defies logic. God's economy, where instead of the first being first and receiving the most reward, it's reversed. So we're going to look today at this economy, and we're going to look at it through the lens of mercy. So we've got this wonderfully extravagant year we're celebrating, and I claim it as extravagant because it's such a gift to focus on this role of mercy in our lives and in our church. So let's look at this reading through the lens of mercy. And as I went back and I was reading the first papal letter, I think it was last March, where Pope Francis decides to begin this commitment to this year of mercy, he draws upon the Beatitude. Be ye merciful. Finish it for me. What's the second part of that?
And you'll receive mercy.
And you'll receive mercy. Be ye merciful as, what's that, another way of finishing that?
As I am.
As I am. As the Father is, right? As your Father in heaven is. So whatever we can learn from this reading about this distinctive economy which defies our economic understanding, it's going to give us insight into the invitation for each of us, how we might be more merciful. I'm not worried about it. I'm not. So be ye merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful, is going to animate the way that we look at this reading today. I'd like to start by talking about putting it in a context of, if you were to read commentaries on this particular parable or gospel, what are some of the interpretations made? Now we know with most gospel readings there's levels of interpretations. So let me just situate this with a couple of different interpretations that are made of this gospel. The first one is, if we go back to the church fathers, you know, those first couple of 100 years of the Christian church, some of the church fathers taught that as we look at these different time frames within this day, that the first hour, those that were first selected, that was the time of Adam, if we connected that historically. So the very first workers selected, what that would have been probably at sunrise, that was the time of Adam. And then the next set selected at 9 o'clock, that was the time of Noah. And then as we move into the day, getting to noon, that was the time of Abraham. Do you see how this is unfolding historically in the tradition? And then at the next hour, around 3 o'clock, that was the time of Moses. And then we get to the 11th hour at 5 o'clock, and that was the time of Christ and his apostles. So that's one interpretation made about why might these time frames be significant, that there's a historical analog in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Make sense? Yeah, okay. A second interpretation, and this now is very specific to the Jewish people. What's interesting about this parable is that it's only in the Gospel of Matthew. Just like the prodigal son is only in the Gospel of Luke, this particular parable about the workers in the vineyard is only in Matthew. And one thing we know about Matthew is that Matthew was the gospel that was the target audience for Matthew was the Jewish people. It's the most rabbinic of the Gospels. All right, so Luke is often referred to as for the Gentiles and the converts, but Matthew's really making a case to the Jewish people. So if we look at it through that lens, if we think about Matthew's target audience, let's then talk about another way of interpretation. We can look at it to say that many of the Jews, those who arrived first as workers, would be rejected, and many of the Gentiles, those who arrived later in the day under God's salvific plan, if you will, would be accepted. The apostles were sent forth at the first and third hour of the gospel day, and while Christ was on earth, their business was to call the Jews. After Christ's ascension at the 6th and 9th hour, so comparing this then to the time of day in the reading at noon and 3, they went out again, and they were still preaching the gospel to the Jews only. And afterward, toward the end of the day, the 11th hour, the apostles called the Gentiles. So through their work, the 12 apostles, they primarily were focused on spreading the word of Jesus Christ to fellow Jews. But then at the 11th hour, they reached out and shared the message with the Gentiles. So they called the Gentiles to the same work and privilege that the Jews had. Do you see the analog here? If we compare the workers in the vineyard to both the Jewish people and then the subsequent Gentiles, and told them that in Christ Jesus there should be no difference between Jew and Greek or Jew and Gentile. So that's yet another interpretation, was the salvific invitation of Jesus Christ and how that was extended historically to both Jew and Gentile. Yet a third, and this will be the last one I'll feature for today. This is enough interpretive trivia for the day. Is that we can apply the co-workers and the different hours of the day to the ages of our lives. That almost sounds like a soap opera, doesn't it? In which our souls are converted to Christ. So first, there are some who when we're very young, we experience a calling, we begin to work in the vineyard. We're like the ones sent out early in the morning. So a prime example in the Gospels would be a fellow like John the Baptist. I mean, he started in utero, basically, with his sense of calling, right? He was one of the first ones. If he were a worker in the vineyard, he would have been right there at the beginning of the day called. He would not have been standing idly around. But then we all know, and maybe some of us from our own life experience, that we experienced a deeper sense of call or conversion in middle age. So we're like those workers in the vineyard that at noon or maybe 3 o'clock, we really felt a sense of God's salvific call to go work in the vineyard. And that the power of the divine grace became magnified in us more notably at that time in our lives. Well, where do we go from the young to the middle age? Where's what might be the next stage? Who's at the 5 o'clock hour, people?
The news.
What's that?
The news of the day.
Well, the news of the day. Yes, right, exactly. But also, as we look at this passage, we think of, if we apply it to the ages of our lives, we think about old age. And there are some for whom they may have a deathbed conversion. We all hear of this, right? Now, St. John the Baptist, who started in utero with this sense of being called to Jesus Christ, and the person with the deathbed conversion, both of these people received the same salvation, do they not? Is that what our tradition teaches? Yes, so this is how this passage of the different times of day applies to the ages of life. So there are some of us for whom we may not experience conversion until the 11th hour. And it's in old age that we experience the sense of being hired on and converted, to apply it to the scripture. So here again, many who were first converted would be last and lowest, and many who were last converted may be first and highest. There's not a predictable sequence, all right? So what's the purpose? Those are three ways of making meaning of this in terms of interpretations of the different periods of the day. But what's the purpose of all of this, aside from, oh, isn't that interesting how we can make these different interpretations? Well, parables, the purpose is not to get into the interpretation of the minutia. So it's not as interesting as it may be to talk about the different time periods of the day. At the end of it, what's less important is the minutia. How much were they paid? What's the worth of a denarius in today's economy? That really isn't the most important purpose of this parable for us today, or what these different hours may mean, as interesting as it may be to look at these various interpretations. The purpose is, getting back to our theme, that God will show mercy to all, and that no one, through their merit, no matter if they've been a follower of Jesus Christ from the very first moment they took breath, or if they're with their very last breath they converted to be a follower of Jesus Christ. No one merits that. That's all gift. That's all the mercy of God. So that's the underlying theme that this gospel is asking us for. What I'd like to do, other than framing it in terms of the historical interpretation, well, let's set that aside for now. And let's look at the purpose and the message this gospel has for us in our life today, March, what is it today, 13th. What is the message that this parable has for each of us today at this moment? I was at a retreat the other day, and one of the people at my lunch table, we were talking about this whole theme of mercy and how it relates to Gospels. And he said, you know, the very best thing I heard is that aside from Jesus, in every Gospel story, the people in the story are a reflection of us. So if you want to pray with the Gospel story, whether it be the story we're going to be praying with in just a moment, or whether it be any Gospel story, the way that the Spirit can really stir in our hearts is for us to see a reflection of ourselves in each of those characters. Okay, so I know we've already looked at prodigal son, right? And that was the theme of last week. So we look at what in me is like the father, what in me is like the oldest son, what in me identifies with the prodigal son. Yes? All of those. It's not that some of us are the prodigal and others are the older brother. This way of making meaning in prayer is to suggest that all of these characters in these parables reflect a part of us. Does that make sense? And it's very intriguing to enter into that in your imagination, because that's basically the only way you can do it. You can't sit there strategically and try to think it through and figure it out. You need You're invited to enter into it through your imagination. So I'd like to introduce you to a process this morning. For some of you, this may not be new, but I find that every time I experience this prayer process, it's as if it is new to me, because I do discover a new message that I receive through praying with the Gospels in this way. So let me talk about the backdrop for this way of praying. How many of you are familiar with the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius? So St. Ignatius, you know, doing a lot of really great stuff in the 16th century. All right, Jesuit, one of the founders of the Jesuit order. And there are different ways that you can participate in the spiritual exercises. The most common classic way is a sequence of 4 weeks, and each week has a theme. And so for many, when it used to be primarily religious people who participated in these exercises, they were able to remove themselves from their everyday ministry and spend 28 days in these exercises. So that's how they were originally designed. And now, since more and more, since, you know, after Vatican II, especially in the 70s and beyond, more and more of those of us who are lay people have received this gift of these spiritual exercises. And so they've now been adapted into a 9-month sequence where every day you pray a portion, because so few of us have the luxury or the scheduling opportunity to spend 28 days away. So each day has a specific gospel to pray with. And the way in which you pray with it is this imaginative way of praying. So this is often referred to as Ignatian contemplation or imaginative prayer. So it's my pleasure. I get very excited about introducing people to this because I have found it to be transformative myself. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the approach to praying and overview, the steps, if you will, and then I'm just going to guide us through it with the gospel. And I want to give you the overview now so that you feel free, if you wish, if you choose to close your eyes or just kind of chill into it rather than feeling you have to look at your paper. But so let me just talk about an overview. So what Ignatius found is that his relationship with Jesus deepened when he practiced this form of imaginative prayer. So I invite you to notice if there's a deepening that you experience of your understanding of Jesus at work in your life through this prayer. So with any form of prayer, we talk about the disposition. You know, how do we prepare our hearts for prayer? And so one of the things I'm going to invite us to do is I'm going to just invite us to take some deep breaths to maybe set things down around us so that we can just be fully present to what's going on within our bodies and attend to the Spirit deep within our hearts. And then I'm going to read the parable once again. I've already read it once, but I'm going to read it once again. And if you choose to read along, if you find it helpful to read along, please do. Read along with me. If that helps your imagination, some of us are visual learners. It will be a catalyst to our learning. And then I'm going to invite you to offer up a petition for this time in prayer that Ignatian talks about. That's very key. What is it that you're seeking in this time of prayer? It may be more courage to respond to Jesus' call in your life. Maybe you're seeking greater mercy or compassion for yourself, greater mercy or compassion for others. It may be you want more of a personal revelation of Jesus in your life. So I ask you to think about what it is you seek for this prayer period. And I'm going to just pause so you may reflect on that for a moment. So soon I will begin reading, and I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself. Just like my friend suggested that everybody in the reading is a reflection of ourselves. As I read again this parable, I want you to enter into this scene. So where's the marketplace where you are waiting to see if you are selected first thing in the morning to go work in the vineyard? And then I want you to get in touch with the sights and the smells and the sounds, the time of day, the temperature, wherever your imagination takes you. So I'm going to read the passage and then I'm going to guide you through, but I invite you to just in your imagination, let your imagination unfold as we read once again and we enter into the experience of this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You, too, go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. He went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, he found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" And they answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but they too also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones only worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." The landowner said to them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for this usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first and the first will be last." I invite you to notice as this story unfolded, what are you seeing or thinking or feeling? With whom did you most identify? Was it the laborers who were selected first thing in the morning? Is it those who stand idle and wait to be hired? Is it those who were hired at 9 or noon or 3, or had to wait till the very end, almost the end of the day at 5? Or did you find yourself identifying with the landowner? If you found that a specific character caught your attention, move deeper into that aspect of the story. Don't feel the need to go through all of the characters. So if the landowner caught your attention, move deeper into that character. How does this character live in you? How do you share his attitudes, feelings, responses? So I'm just going to pause there as you just let that settle. And our prayer is not only time in contemplation, it's also time in conversation with God. So now you're invited. St. Ignatius invites us to begin a conversation. Is there anything that you want to say to one or more of the characters in the story? Is there anything that you hear one of the characters communicating to you? And if so, listen for their responses. Is there anything you want to share with God about what this story is stirring in you? A question or a memory, a fear, a hope, a desire, an insight? So I'm going to invite you to slowly shift your awareness back into our circle. And as you do, I'd like you to consider what is the invitation that this particular parable, this gospel reading, is offering you today. So we have two things that I'd like us to do. I'd like us to talk about the prayer process itself, and then I'd like to the extent that any of you feel comfortable, talk about your experience of it, and perhaps the invitation or the new insight or the feeling that you received. We can do this in various ways. This is a small group, so we could do this as a group, or we could do this at table. I don't know you all well enough to make that decision for you. Do we have a preference of how you'd like to proceed?
I vote for together.
Together? I kind of like togetherness myself. Yeah. I'm hearing the refrain from High School Musical, which was really popular at age of my son. We're all in this together. So, okay, great. All right. So, how about if I begin? And I begin not because I'm the facilitator, but usually it helps to create greater comfort to model the process. So let me begin. This is the process I use to prepare for my time with you. I moved into Ignatian prayer with this particular gospel. I wanted to see what did these workers and this landowner have to say to me. So I began with this Thursday, and it's been a lot of fun. I feel like they've been hanging out with me basically all week, you know. So I was surprised. At what my experience was. I was on the 3 o'clock crew. Now, I've got a dear friend of mine here today who's known me about 30 years, and she knows I'm an early morning riser. If I'm not 10 minutes early, I feel late. If you know Myers-Briggs, when I first took it, I was nothing but J. I mean, so for me to be at 3 o'clock, you can imagine, I'd be tearing out my hair, you know, standing there idle with myself. I mean, can you see it? I mean, I can't even put it into words. It just really, it really whacks me out, the thought of it. So I was amazed. That I felt such an invitation to identify with the 3 o'clock workers. And I do think it's something developmentally. I think had I known how to do this way of praying and had done it in my 20s, I would have so fiercely wanted to identify with the first thing in the morning. You know, I wanted to be recruited and get to work and do the full day and be a person of merit. And I would have expected a bonus because I would have done such good work. And I would have been envious of the generosity to the people who showed up later. I count on it. I know that about myself. But this was a very different experience of I really felt empathy for the people waiting to be invited to work. And a memory came back, and I'm almost embarrassed to confess this memory, but this was the memory. I remember the year in 9th grade, new to high school, tried out for cheer, you know, trying to get involved, and they stood us against a wall, and you had to turn around. It's an awful system. I'd never select any team this way. It was awful. But they had us turn toward the wall, and then they would just come and tap people on the shoulder. You know, so there are much better ways to honor the dignity of people who have tried out for something. But that memory came back to me. I remember that sense of standing idle and looking at that wall and how humiliating that was, and hoping I'd be chosen and not knowing if I'd be chosen. Can you see how deep this prayer? So look at now how through this prayer experience, look at how Jesus is inviting me to heal that memory. Do you see that? I was invited back to that memory. Now, I don't spend a lot of time, I'm 53 years old, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about cheer tryouts when I was 14. I really don't. But I was invited back to this, and I felt I could smell I felt like I was back in that scene. It was that visceral. So that's the potential power of this way of praying. And I had new insight. I had mercy for myself. I thought, oh, what an awful experience. I also had greater compassion for those of us who stand idle. There are so many people my age who want to be working. They've got incredible skills. They're idle. They want to be involved. They want to, you know, so there's all kinds of ways that my identification with that 3 o'clock set of people is very, very strong. And I think there's more. Are you sensing there's more for me to explore with this? There is. Yes, there is. There's a greater dialogue that I can enter into in prayer. So enough about me, enough about my experience. I just wanted to get us started. All right? Is anyone else willing to share, either to talk about the process or the invitation you received through the process? Sure. Yeah, Jeannie.
There were a number of, I guess, situations or things I identified with here. The landowner, I saw myself as mother, landowner, with my son. And the bigger picture not going with him, I was looking at the overall picture of my son being idle. And it began in middle school, high school, and he's 22. And you know some of the story, obviously, Diane. But he's a brilliant young man, brilliant. And he's a hard worker, and he was in college for a while, but then he quit, and Mom, I'm not going to finish, and all of that. So I'm thinking of this idleness here. But I need to learn from that because he's not ready. He's not ready. Maybe he'll be the 5 o'clock person. I'm more of the early riser, and I'm not idle, and, you know. So I guess I need to learn from this as a mother to kind of let go of that. I know that's probably a different perspective, but that's just what I'm taking from that.
And that's the invitation you received from my reading.
That's my invitation, which I needed because I had already, on a personal level, had talked to Diane about my son. And, you know, that he's got all this going for him, but he's just not, he's not moving forward. But you know what? We're all moving forward. It's not my place. It's not my place to, you know, say, you know, you've got to do this, you've got to move forward, da-da-da. No, he's not ready. He's
So
at 5 o'clock.
what I'm hearing is you received greater compassion and mercy,
Yes.
both for yourself as mother
Yes.
and for your son. Am I hearing that?
That's what you're hearing.
Okay,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
These are two very different experiences. Same reading, very different experiences.
Exactly.
Let's do one more, just so we have a real nice spectrum of possibilities. Nanny. Thank you.
This is very emotional. I was so surprised.
Okay.
My marketplace was my family as a little girl. but emotionally, it was just a barren place. And I, of course, felt very comfortable playing religion. This is just go with blah, blah, blah. But what happened was that was my marketplace. My mom was Catholic, my dad was an atheist, and so she dutifully, very parochial Catholic, she did all the things, and I think with her at the end of her life, and her heart truly loved the Lord, but she showed it differently. Anyway, so we did all the right things. So the landowner was God, and when we would go to church, and I went to Catholic school, I caught on to it. It was salvation for me, that there was something else I could think about besides my family. So I'm actually a 5 o'clock in the morning, is that when I first started?
Whatever, sunrise, yeah.
Okay, so I'm a 9 o'clock.
Depending on was it daylight savings time or not, we don't know. I don't know what
But then I had to go my own way for many, many years, and I entered different religions, always seeking, and I came back at 5 o'clock. No, I didn't come back at 5. I came back at 3. So I came back at 3.
So the ages of life, that interpretation also made, okay.
But my overall thing is the gratitude to the landowner, both in the morning and at 3 o'clock, because the landowner was always there waiting for me. That's what made me cry.
Everything. That's all it
It's
is,
a
everything.
beautiful exercise. I've never done that before. Wow. And I love what you said about identifying with the 3 o'clocks, because you are a morning person, and you have a great faith. I don't want to again for you, but yeah, I came in late, so I consider myself morning plus 3. I should say I led and came.
So you can see how powerful this is if each of us would have, if we had the time to hear from each of us what this stirred in us. And it's just a testament to the way the Holy Spirit touches the particularities for each of us, but yet how we receive this universal message from that, from each story. What I'd like to do, I'm going to make a transition now to connect this to the theme of mercy. I don't think I have to work real hard to do that. I think it's evident. But I'd like to say a couple of things around what Pope Francis is up to specifically around mercy. But before I do that, are there any clarifications or questions, concern about this way of praying? Because of course my hope is, as a teacher, you're going to try this out again. Each of the Gospels, all of the readings, it's not even limited to the Gospels, but the Gospels are particularly great because they so vividly paint a picture. But any of the scriptures you can use to enter into the story. So what clarifications, what's questions? And trust me, I'll wait, because as a teacher I know there's at least one question in the room. So let me wait for it, at least one. Or a comment, an observation, great.
Well, basically, when you started out with the 3 different, the prophets and things like that, basically the answer to everything is salvation, basically, when it comes to whenever we're reading the Bible. So, and I never even dreamed that any of those things would be related to, because I'm the complainer guy.
Are you the grumbler?
Yeah, so I wouldn't probably do that to his face, but I should have complained to everybody else, and I wouldn't show up working. The next day it is office, it is Farmfield. Interestingly enough, we're about 6 blocks from where they used to have a daily worker dealer. People would just gather on the streets. This is before the...
Here in our neighborhood.
Yeah, across by the Federal Reserve Building. And pickup trucks would drive by, and you see, I need 3 guys. They would check in the back of the pickups, and that's how they employed day laborers in those days. But this is back in the 60s. Yeah. But then the matter is the salvation, those Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Christ, those are the 5 basic covenants, the agreements between God and ourselves. And He's asking us to do. So I'm going to try to look at the Bible again, especially the New Testament.
Through that lens.
Through that lens.
Yeah. I'm also hearing there's an invitation to touch into that grumbler within me.
That's too hardcore.
it's a petition, it's not a demand.
I'm well.
Okay. All right. Any other kinds of clarifications around this way of encountering the Gospels? Matt?
So you meant this 9-month process.
Yeah.
Where's the resources for that? And then could you just give a synopsis of the process again?
Of the prayer process?
Yes. I mean,
The resources for that, you know, Susan Stabile does a lot of accompanying people on the spiritual exercises in everyday life. And there's a curriculum, if you will. There are some prayer booklets available. So maybe that's something we as a community could do a session on. Just an overview of that 9-month process. It's one of the best kept secrets. I mean, I've even talked with the Jesuit priests with whom I work with. They said, even as priests, they weren't introduced to the exercises, some of them, until the 70s. I mean, so this has really come online as of Vatican II, and it's just a very, very precious gift for those of us who are laity. And it's very easy to adapt. You know, if you carve out time for prayer on a daily basis, why not incorporate this as your guidance? So let's talk about that. With faith formation, that might be a really great overview so people become more aware of it, all right? The other thing is, and I'm happy to get copies of this because I read this a lot, but you know, basically we're preparing our heart. We're talking about what our intention is for our prayer time. Now this is just good prayer 101, you know? Even when we prepare for Mass, every time I go up to the Eucharist, I think, what's my intention for receiving this Eucharist? What's my petition? What am I seeking in my heart? What do I most need? So I think this sense of petition is really key for any kind of prayer. And then we just enter into the imaginative, the contemplating as if we're in the scene. And if we led this and had more time, you know, or if you do this on your own, you may find you just read the very first part, and you find yourself so drawn into, maybe you would read, and you find yourself so drawn into those morning workers that got invited, and your imagination may just take you there, and the Spirit is inviting you into that. So St. Ignatius would say, just savor whatever's going. Don't feel the need. It's not like a school assignment where we have to finish the reading. If you find yourself invited into a portion in your imagination and the Spirit is guiding you there, follow where the Spirit leads. You can always come back and finish the text. The text will always be there for you. Follow where it leads, and then have a conversation. The term that Ignatius uses is colloquy. You have a conversation, you dialogue with God and with the characters.
Do you know that Deacon Tom does a daily homily that you can get emailed, and it's called, is it Jesus Speaking?
Okay.
And it's the Ignatian principle.
Does it?
With the daily gospel.
Okay.
And at the bottom, it's pretty much, you know, what are you going to see, you know, the start of the day, and then you review it in the evening. And it's taken from the principle of that daily gospel. But he does that daily.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks. So we have these resources already available. Thank you. What, please tell me your
Oh,
name.
it's
Betty. Thank you, Betty. Thanks for calling that to our attention. So yeah, and we end with, what did I discover? The reflection. What did I discover? And that's what I just facilitated us through. All right, so preparing, the petition, the contemplating, the conversation, and then the reflection. And you know, some days you've got a lot of time for this, you know, where it can be very spacious, and then there are other times where you do it in a more abbreviated fashion. But as you can see, we did all of 10 minutes as I guided you through. That is not a long time, but it can be very rich. It can be very rich. All right, let me now, in our concluding minutes, and I'm happy to stay around if there are any questions, further questions or comments, but let me now key this into the business of mercy. And I'm going to talk about two things in particular that are are very stirring for me in this year of mercy, in what I've read of Pope Francis's both interviews and writing. And the first is this whole business of the church's field hospital. I love this. This just rocks my world to think about. We, because we, right? Vatican II teaches, we are the people of God. We are the church. Sure, a church is a building, but the real meaning of church, of Vatican II, is it's us. We are the field hospital. Isn't it exciting? It's so exciting. So in an interview, this is featured in America. You can find this online. It's titled "A Big Heart Open to God." September 30th, 2013. The Pope says, "I see clearly that the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness, proximity." Here it comes. "I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol or she about the level of her blood sugars. You have to heal the wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds. Heal the wounds. And you have to start from the ground up." He goes on to say the church sometimes has locked itself up in small things and small-minded rules. But the most important thing is the first proclamation that Jesus Christ has saved us and loved us, no matter what time we show up. So as part of this, us being deployed to work in this field hospital, he says the first reform must be our attitude. We must be people who can warm the hearts, people who can walk through the dark night with them, who know how to dialogue. That gets me to my second point. My favorite thing in the entire, the book that's stacks and stacks of them everywhere at Barnes & Noble or any bookstore is The Name of God is Mercy, right? How many of you have read? Yeah, it's been on the bestseller list now for a time, and it's based on an interview. It's all based on an interview, and I forget the person who interviewed him, but that's how the book is constructed. And in that book, here was my favorite book. Here was my favorite quote. He talks about the apostolate of the ear. So as disciples, just like he said earlier, in the field hospital, we're there to heal the wounds. How do we do that? Through dialogue, through listening, and it's through this apostolate. Our calling as disciples is to the apostolate of the ear. Let me continue. He says, mostly people are looking for someone to listen to them, someone willing to grant them time, to listen to their dramas and difficulties. This is what I call the apostolate of the ear. Of the ear, I was going to say, of the ear. And it is important, very important. So the beauty to me of encountering and dialoguing with the gospel, this way of praying that we practice today, really helps to attune our ear. What St. Benedict would refer to as the ear of our heart. We have this deep, deep dialogue within us. And I have found the more that we participate in this deep, deep dialogue within us with the Word of God, the better attuned these ears are for the apostolate, for listening in daily life through the part of the field hospital. So with that, I'd love to close. I'm so grateful we have these beautiful prayer cards that were made for us. Are you enjoying having these? I love these. And so I'd like to lead us in the Holy Year of Mercy prayer. If you could close with that today, please. Lord Jesus Christ, send your Spirit and consecrate every one of us with its anointing. so the Jubilee of Mercy may be a year of grace from the Lord and your church. With renewed enthusiasm, bring good news to the poor. Proclaim liberty to captives and the oppressed, and restore sight to the blind. We ask this through the intercession of Mary, Mother of Mercy, you who live and reign with the Father and the Holy Spirit, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all. Blessings to you.
All right.